fractions on a number line. You really have to understand what a fraction is in order to make this easy. A fraction is when you take one whole something, like one whole pizza, and divide it up into equal-sized parts and pieces. So if you think about it on your number line, you can see right here from 0 to 1, I would have one whole. And you can see inside between 0 and 1, there's lots of different pieces that are the same size. I just need to figure out how many pieces there are, and then I should be able to put the different fractions on my number line. So a strategy that I use is I like to draw a rectangle from 0 to 1. You need to make sure that you stop at 1 because that would be considered one whole. Then I count how many pieces I have. Probably the biggest mistake that kids make is that they want to count the lines. You don't want to count the lines, you want to count the pieces. So in this rectangle right here, I can see I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 pieces. That means when I get to the end of this first piece, I would have 1 out of 5 pieces. When I get to my next line, that would tell me that I have 1, 2 out of 5 pieces, or 2/5. When I get to my next line, it would mean I'd have 1, 2, 3 out of 5 pieces. And you've probably noticed the pattern by now. Once I get to the next line, I'm going to have 1, 2, 3, 4 out of 5 pieces. And that means when I finally get to the very end, I would have 5 out of 5 pieces. 5/5, or 5 over 5, is the same thing as one whole. I like to write that number 5 out of 5 underneath it because that helps me if I have any extra tallies. Now I'm wondering what would happen over here. Well, I just count how many pieces I have. I'm still counting in fifths because that's the size of the piece. So this is 1/5, 2/5, 3/5, 4/5, 5/5. When I add one more fifth on, I would have 6/5. I could also write that as one whole and one extra fifth. Either way would be the same amount and be correct on my number line. Let's try again with this one. Remember, the first step is to understand what is a fraction. It's a piece of one whole. Then I can either draw a rectangle around the outside to really visualize that one whole, or another strategy would be just to count the spaces in between the lines. So here's 1 piece, 2 pieces, 3 pieces. Remember, the biggest mistake is kids want to count the lines. Don't count the lines, count the spaces in between the lines. So there's 1, 2, 3 pieces in between 0 and 1. Now I need to write those fractions. So when I get to the line, this first line, I would have 1 out of 3 pieces. When I get to the next line, I would have 2 out of 3 pieces. When I get to this line right here, I have 1, 2, 3 out of 3 pieces. Notice I have a lot longer to go to finish up my number line. I keep counting in thirds because thirds is telling me that there's 3 pieces in one whole. It's telling me the size. So for the rest of these, I can go ahead and just write that out of 3 on the bottom. They're always going to have thirds as the size. Now I just keep counting up. If this was 3 pieces, this would now make it 4 pieces, so it's 4/3. This would now make it 5 pieces, so it's 5/3. This would now make it 6 pieces, so it's 6/3. I also could have thought of this as one whole and an extra third, 1 and 2/3, 1 and 3/3. You also could have seen that when I had 3 pieces, that's a whole number, so really 6/3 would be the same as 2 wholes. If you can get to the point of knowing that this is 4/3, 5/3, and 6/3 though, you'd be set. Let's practice one more time. I remember that I'm thinking about how many pieces goes in one whole, which would be from the 0 to the 1. How many pieces do you see? Most kids would tell me they see either 4 or 3 pieces. Which one is correct and how do you know? You should have said that 4 is correct because you're counting pieces, not lines. So there's 1 piece, 2 pieces, 3 pieces, 4 pieces. That means my denominator, my bottom number, is going to be out of 4 because there are 4 pieces in one whole. So I can go ahead and just write those 4s in now so that I'm set and ready to go. Remember, this denominator tells me the size of it. Fourths are obviously going to be smaller than thirds. Fifths are smaller than fourths. It has to do with how many pieces there are in that one whole. Now, I just need to count how many pieces I have. So this is 1 out of 4 pieces. This is 1, 2 out of 4 pieces. This is 1, 2, 3 out of 4 pieces. This is 1, 2, 3, 4 out of 4 pieces. Now that I have extra, I could continue to count and say this is 1 and an extra fourth, or 1 and an extra 2/4, or what's probably easiest, oops, that's a mistake, I should have said 4, sorry about that. What would be easiest would be for me just to keep that denominator the same, and just keep telling how many pieces I have. So I'm still measuring in fourths. This is 1/4, 2/4, 3/4, 4/4. This would now become 5/4, 6/4, and I could continue on forever if I needed. Let's go ahead and erase this just so that it's nice and clear. Always needs to keep the same denominator, the same bottom number, so that should be 4/4. Let's go ahead and have you practice them yourself. On a whiteboard or on a piece of paper, sketch out these number lines. Make sure you count carefully how far it is from 0 to 1 and how many tallies there are. And try to figure out what are the missing fractions on each line. Go ahead and pause the video now, and you can start again when you're ready to check your work. Okay, let's go ahead and check your work. Remember, the main thing is that you're counting the spaces, not the lines. So I'm going to go ahead and draw little circles on each one of those spaces. I can see that in between 0 and 1, because we always are measuring how many are in one whole, there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 spaces, which means there are 6 pieces. So I'm counting in 6. I can automatically go ahead and write that as my denominator. For all of my fractions, it's never going to change because I'm always measuring the same size pieces, which are 6. Now I just need to figure out how far I am on the number line each time, how many 6 I've passed through. So when I get to the first tally, that would be 1/6. When I get to the second tally, that would be 2/6. When I get to the third tally, that would be 3/6. You can see how there's 1, 2, 3 circles. When I get to the next tally, that would be 4/6. When I get to the next tally, it would be 5/6. And when I get all the way over here to 1, that would be 6 out of 6. I don't have any other tallies, but if I did, I could continue on with 7/6, 8/6, 9/6, and so on. Do the same procedure for the next one. I want to figure out how many spaces there are between 0 and 1 in my one whole. So right here, I can see there's a space, and there's another space. There's only 2 spaces in this number line between 0 and 1. So that means my denominator is going to be 2. I'm counting in halves. When I just have one of those pieces, it'd be 1/2. When I have 2 of those pieces, it would be 2/2. Now notice there's a lot more that I'm supposed to fill in, so I can keep that denominator of 2 as I go all the way across because I'm still always going to be counting in halves. Then I just keep counting on how many spaces I have, and it'll give me improper fractions all the way across. So this is 1/2, 2/2, this would be 3/2, 4/2, 5/2, 6/2. Now because it's halves and we're pretty familiar with halves, you might have had some slightly different answers that would still be correct. For example, it would be okay for me to say that this is 1 1/2 and that this would be 2. This would be 2 1/2 and this would be 3. The improper fractions are just fine as well. So 1/2, 2/2, 3/2, 4/2, 5/2, 6/2. Let's practice on one last one. Remember, you're counting spaces, not tallies, going in between 0 and 1 whole. So there's 1 space, 2 spaces, 3 spaces, 4 spaces, 5 spaces in between 0 and 1. That means 5 is going to be my denominator, my bottom number, because that tells me how many there are in one whole. Even when I go beyond the 1, I can still keep 5 as my denominator. Then all I have to do for my numerator is figure out how many pieces I've passed through on the number line so far. So right here, this would be 1 piece is all that I have passed so far. Once I get here, I would have passed 2 pieces. Once I get here, I would have passed 3 pieces. Once I get here, it'd be 4 pieces. And when I have one whole, that would be 5 out of 5 pieces. Moving on, this would become 6 pieces. You also could have said it was 1 whole plus 1 extra fifth, which would be written as 1 and 1/5. Now that you've watched the video, if you have any questions, ask your teacher, then you can go ahead and move on to your next activity.